Hi, this is the Fresh Toones Show. My name is Dave Paltz, and on the first Friday of each month, I've been doing a series of shows called Telling Our Stories. In remembrance of my mom, who died in April from COVID-19, I'm dedicating today's Telling Our Stories show to her. She would have been 101 this month, and up until she got COVID, she was doing relatively well. When she was 92 years old, I had my mom sit down for a number of videotaping sessions, and I recorded her sharing her memories of her life. She grew up during the Depression on a farm near the Finger Lakes and was able to express quite vividly what it was like. I'm going to take the whole hour of today's show to share her story as edited for a documentary I produced. It was called The Girl of the Finger Lakes.
My name is Catherine Pulse, and I was born on August 23rd, 1919, in a little white house in the town of McDougal. My life was very simple on the farm. We did not have electricity or any running water or anything like that in our house, so we had a lot of different chores to do, which were different from today. We had to go pump the water from the pump and bring it in the house and put it on a stove to heat it, and even be able to wash dishes or take a bath. So life was really very simple in the country. In the kitchen, right in front of the stove where it was warm, just in a big wash tub, which was once a week. We had to get our hair washed and have a Saturday night bath. We had an outhouse, which was like a little bathroom outdoors. 2 holes in it. And cold, no heat, no water, catalog for toilet paper many times. In our home, we had no furnace for heat. We had what they called a stove. Ours would have to be a nice looking stove. It almost looked like a Victrola or something. We had that in the living room, so that we had one room that was warm. Of course, the stove in the kitchen kept the kitchen warm. And stovepipes leading up to the bedrooms upstairs is what took a little of the chill off of the upstairs rooms. I remember warming up our beds at night with what we called a soapstone. It was just like a small brick that we would put in the oven and get it really hot, and then we put a little covering over it, like a flannel or something, and we take that and put it in our beds and put it all over the bed first, but then leave it at the foot of the bed where we'd put our feet on to keep our feet warm at night when we were sleeping. Because we had no electricity in the house, we had what we called lamps, and of course they were not very bright. We did all of our work, what we did in the home, from washing dishes to cooking, with lamplight when it was dark. We had a record player in our day, and it stood quite tall, probably 4 feet tall or more. And you had a cover on it. We put the cover up, put the record on, wind it up on the side. Well, I guess we wound it up until it couldn't wind anymore. And then we turned it on and listened to the music. It was really nice music. It was called a Victrola, so I don't know if that was the name of it or not. But we called it a Victrola, so I think that was the name of a company at one time, too. We did have a radio, just a small radio. We listened to the news, I remember, at nighttime and during our dinner time. And then Amos and Andy would come on, very funny and made us laugh, and we never wanted to miss that. Every night we had to turn on Amos and Andy.
Tell me, the way we is going now, we is just starving to death, that's all.
Now listen, Amos, you just stick to me and you'll be rich. What would you think if you'd wake up some morning and put your hand in your pants pocket and find a roll of $20 bills?
I wouldn't think nothing. I'd know I had on somebody else's pants, that's all.
telephone. It was on the wall. It was one of these telephones that when it rang, you could really listen in onto other people's conversation, which wasn't a nice thing to do. And everybody had their own ring. Our ring was like 1 long and 3 short. My father was a farmer who raised all kinds of oats, wheat, corn. I don't think we had barley, but some of our neighbors did. When these things were ready to be harvested, all the neighbors would come in and help each other. So my mother would cook a meal for like 14, 15 men from all over the neighborhood, and they'd come and help my father get the harvest things where they should be, and I had to always help with the meal. In the fields, when we were harvesting the crops, we always used horses. Horses pulled the loaded hay, pulled all the machinery that we had. We had 2 big old horses. Even when my mother would be helping him unload the hay, she used the horses to pull the hay up into the hay mound. My mother was my father's helper because he didn't have any sons. My sister did a lot of the work, but my mother was his helper. She would drive the horses when they would get the hay off of the wagon and get it in the barn. And it was really heavy work because she had to turn the horses around and bring that thing that goes connected with the horses. It was really heavy work. But she did that every summer. My sister usually did the driving of the horses because she did a better job than I did. You had to be very careful when you turned the horses to make a turn that you didn't tip the wagon over. And I wasn't too sure of what I would do with that. And so she usually drove. I walked behind the hay loader and picked up all the hay that the hay loader missed and threw it up on the hay loader. That was my job. We also had cows, probably 15 or 20, and they were mostly Holstein cows. We never had New Jersey cows. They were always just the black and white ones. In the early days, we milked the cows by hand. Not me, but my father and his help that he had. And then he did buy a milking machine in later years. That made the milking much easier, but the cows always had to be stripped, what they called after the milking machine was taken off because it couldn't get all the milk out. So then my father and mother, and I think even my sister helped a little bit with that, of stripping the cows afterward.
No piggy.
Stripping means that they did this by hand, milking the whole cow, the whole, udder, I guess it was. They just had to strip them after to make sure that all the milk was out. That's what stripping meant. I can still see my mother sitting on a stool down by the cow, stripping and getting the last little squirt of milk that she could get. The milk was stored in a milk house because we had vats of really cold water in there to keep the milk fresh until it got taken to the train station. We had a separator in an ice house that separated the cream from the milk because I remember my mother used to make butter. We had one of these old-fashioned churners that we had to keep pushing up and down with our hands until it got butter. When I got older, when the animals were out to pasture, I would have to go down before it was their milking time, get them out of the field, and we had to cross a railroad track into the lane and get them down back to the barn. And on the way to the barn was a water pump, and I would have to keep pumping while they were drinking and then chase them back into the barnyard. Get back here, you guys. We also had chickens, and I was not a chicken lover. I used to clean the eggs because we took them to the Labdal store in Geneva to sell, so they had to be clean. But I did not like to go into the chicken coop. The chickens would just fly right toward you. They'd be in my head and sitting on my shoulders, and I'd be shooing them away. When Wall Street collapsed in 1929, we were not aware of what was happening. At least I wasn't. My parents never said anything about, not having enough to eat. Being farmers, we did have something to eat. We had milk, we had made our own butter, and we had a lot of things that a lot of people didn't have. So I was never aware that there was even a depression on. My sister was older, so she had the outdoor work more to do to help my father, and I always helped my mother. I was the housekeeper kind of that did the dishes and helped with the ironing and helped with doing everything she do, sweeping the floor. My mother was my teacher. We did our laundry in the little wood house right off of our house. We had a machine that turned the belt on the washing machine, very noisy. And then after it was washed and rinsed, we hung it out on the line to dry. And then it was very nice and fresh when we brought it in. Because we had no electricity in the house, my mother had a sewing machine that she had to use with a foot pedal. And she made all of the clothes for both my sister and I, and herself too. My Aunt Nellie would give us some older things that she had, some old coats and maybe dresses and skirts. And then my mother would take them and cut them down to our size and make all of our clothes. We were never able to go on vacations because of being farmers. We always had cows and they always had to be brought in every day to be milked. And so we would do things probably mostly on a Sunday. We would go to Owasco Park, which had a nice beach, nice eating area, and they had a lot of fun things to do, like riding a roller coaster and the merry-go-round and all those fun things the kids like to do, and that was really a big day out for us. My parents would take us swimming, especially on nice hot days in the summer. We would go down to Seneca Lake and go swimming in just the lake, no special park or anything. And then we used to pick cherries in the summertime too on one of the cherry farms down near Seneca Lake. And sometimes we would go swimming afterwards because we were so sticky with juice we needed to get washed off. We had some pigs on the farm which were used mostly naturally for food. So when it was time to make the sausage, all the family would gather at our house. And it was quite a process because all the intestines that were used to stuff the meat in had to be cleaned several days in advance, soaked in salt water and cleaned, really clean. And then we had a machine that we put those on, browned the meat first, and then it would go into these cleaned intestines to make sausage links, sausage rolls, and some of it we just used sausage patties, which did not require those. That was so good. Oh, we would fry it up as soon as we made it. Those were so good. The whole family worked on that. We had just a very small garden that we used just for our own use. Sweet corn, beans, and tomatoes, always tomatoes. We never had any fruit of our own. If we made jelly or something, we had to buy the strawberries and things that we made our jelly. At holiday time, we would usually go to my grandmother's house for Thanksgiving, and then they came to my father and mother's house for Christmas. Transportation in those times was with a cutter pulled by horses. It was like a sleigh with runners on it, a big sleigh with runners on it, that you could get up and sit in, and we'd bundle all up real tight, cozy, and go and visit our aunts and uncles, and stay for a little while and back home again. When I was growing up, birthdays were not that big, but Christmas was a little bit different. But it wasn't like it is today. If we had a bag of nuts and a bag of oranges, we thought that was a big deal. Living in the country, you don't have those things. I had a Christmas tree in our living room, and so these nuts and oranges were placed under the Christmas tree, and we thought that was a big deal. We would make popcorn balls, or my mother probably would, and they were made with popcorn that we popped ourselves in a kettle on the stove, and some kind of a molassesy syrup that she poured over the top, and we would make them into balls, and that was a good real treat too at Christmas time.
This is the Fresh Toones Show, and today I'm sharing the story of my mom's life as she remembers it, and I used in a documentary called The Girl of the Finger Lakes. I never knew if she'd be able to tell the story in a way that would be interesting for a documentary, but her very animated way of reflecting on her life made me more motivated to take a couple of years to work on it. Right off the bat, I thought I'd run into a problem when she told me about how her family would sit down around the radio, like 40 million other Americans, and listen to the Amos and Andy show. In the end, I decided the racial subject was important to the story, and I included it in the documentary. It was a continuing thread right up until the 1960s. As it turns out, and I never found out until the documentary was already made, where I revealed in the documentary that Amos and Andy were white, my mom was totally baffled, and she said, "Oh no, Amos and Andy weren't white." And I said, "Yeah, Mom, they were." And she said, "No, I saw them on TV." Well, later on, there was a TV show in the 50s called Amos and Andy, and they had black actors. So she was really baffled confused when she saw me put in the documentary that they were white men. I won't say too much more. I'll just let her tell the rest of the story. This is part 2 of The Girl of the Finger Lakes.
When I went to school, it was a one-room schoolhouse about 1.5 miles from where we lived. And in order to keep the school open, they had to have 3 children registered in the school. So my sister was older, so she was able to go with another friend, and I was only 5, and I wasn't supposed to go because I wasn't supposed to go till 6. There was no kindergarten then. We started right in 1st grade. So I let me go to school at 5 in order to keep our school open. In the middle of the school was a pot-belly stove that warmed the school, and on the top of it was a grate, and we would bring potatoes for our lunch, put them on the grate in the morning, and by the time noon came, our potatoes were all baked, and we could have a nice warm lunch. We had one teacher, it's Mrs. Omar, and we had her first for all 8 grades because she was the only teacher there. But I remember liking school a lot. We did all of our homework by lamplight. One of my eyes became strained doing my homework by lamplight. In the winter, when the weather was really bad and you'd get a big snowstorm where we couldn't even get down the road, we would stay at my grandmother's house, which was right across from the school. So we had fun there. My grandfather was German, and he had an accordion. And he would play that accordion, and we would dance, and we were just having the best time. So it wasn't anything sad that happened when we couldn't walk home from school. We had well taken care of. I always liked to read poetry, and I liked to make up poetry. One of my favorite poems was Trees, written by Joyce Filmer. It was just something about it that was so soothing and really, I guess, so true. I can always remember the last line where it says, "Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree." On every Sunday, we would go to church. My sister and I did not go to Sunday school because it was before church, and so it was too early for us to get there at that time because of living on a farm. But in church, our family had about maybe 4 or 5 pews that kind of was not reserved exactly, but was just kept special for our family. All my father's sisters, brothers, their families, we all sat in one section. So for confirmation, all my cousins, my sister and myself were all confirmed on the same day because we were all practically the same age, and we hadn't had a pastor for a few years. And so when one came, he just confirmed the whole group. When I went to high school at Waterloo, that was the nearest high school that we were in the district for, because we had to go by bus. And naturally, we have to come from a one-room school. It was a big school. So I enjoyed high school. We had to again take our lunch, and we had gym occasionally. We weren't too good at it, but we did have gym there and had a good time in high school. I always enjoyed reading books on nurses. There used to be a whole series of books on nurses. And one of the books that I read that I really enjoyed was Girl of the Limberlost.
A Girl of the Limberlost by Jean Stratton Porter. She was afraid to say college at that time. She thought it would be better to wait a few days to see if an opportunity would not come when it would work in more naturally.
When I graduated in high school in 1936, I had won a scholarship in business. And my parents did not want me to lose out on the opportunity to go to a school to get a further education. So I went to the Rochester Business Institute. When I came to Rochester, my parents brought me up on a Saturday. To me, it was just like going to New York City with all the big lights and all the big buildings after coming from the country. And we went to see a movie to make the time go a little faster. But I do not remember what the movie was about. All I kept thinking was, I'm here to stay, I'm here to stay, I'm here to stay. And after the movie was over, we went to the place where I was to stay, met the people that lived there. My parents said goodbye, kissed me, and left to go home. I was so homesick the next day. When I got up into the morning at this home that I was staying on, they had 2 girls. One was 12 and one was 6. And when I got up in the morning and they were downstairs and they were throwing shoes at each other and having a little sister fight, I couldn't imagine what I had gotten into. After lunch, I said, I want to just go out for a walk to get familiar a little bit with the surroundings of where I was living. And the 2 girls were out on their bikes riding, and so they wanted to walk with me. So we went to what they called Wide Waters at the time. It was near Cobb's Hill. And while we were there, walking around, the little 6-year-old was on a bicycle path, and she turned her bicycle and went down a hill right into Cobb's Hill Lake, almost. The bicycle big wheels stuck into the mud, thank goodness. And I ran down the hill and pulled her back up again, and we went back home fast. After that, my homesickness just left. I had to just forget about myself for just a couple of seconds as I thought she was going in the water. My homesickness left, and I was never homesick after that. The first time that I went back to my home where my father and mother lived, I was to come back on New Year's Eve so that I could sit with the children that were there while the parents went out to a party. In the meantime, we had a big snowstorm, and I could not get out of my country home. So the next morning, I went back on the train, and I called the lady where I was staying to explain to her why I could not get home in time to take care of her children the night before. And she was very, very angry with me. So after that little discussion, the RBI placed me in another home, which was at a doctor's home on South Goodman Street. They had just one little boy that I was to look after. That was an interesting place that I went to live because the people were Jewish, and me in my country bringing up did not know too much how they lived, what I noticed was that their food was so different. And I didn't eat right with them. I ate in the kitchen and they ate in their dining room. I did do the cooking for them, but it was just such an unusual situation that I didn't really eat that much. The food was so different, but I didn't get enough to eat. So I would buy some cookies myself and take them up to my bedroom and have cookies at night, which I wasn't supposed to do. I was not to take food into my bedroom.
Catherine, are you in there?
Oh, how good they tasted. I was so hungry. After eating sour cream, which was their main staff of life, I guess, the cookies just tasted so good.
Hey, you're not eating in there, are you?
After I graduated from the RBI, I didn't realize the condition that was going on my parents' farm, that they were struggling to make the payments and were not producing enough to make the payments, that they were going to have to lose the farm. I got a job at a doctor's office, not too far from where I lived. I could walk to work each day. I learned a lot at the doctor's office, because he wanted help sometimes with doing some tests and things, so he was teaching me how to do tests and looking around microscope and find blood cells and find different things that I wasn't familiar with, of course, but I did learn a lot of things working for the doctor. I did not get out of there sometimes until after 10 o'clock at night, and I would walk home to my apartment. I was never scared or feared anybody hurting or anything, but I'm sure I would not do that today. When I started working there, I think I got $18 a week, and I finally did get up to $21 a week after I was there probably a year or so. I rented a room, which was right close to the church that I was attending, and I paid $3.50 a week for one room and the use of a kitchen. I stayed there until I got sick, and I went to stay with my friend from church until I got better. And when I came home, the landlord had put all my things out on the porch. In the meantime, I was in church, and they had a youth group at church for which they invited me to attend. And while there, I met a man by the name of Freddie Pulse.
Well, it seems like a good time to take a little break here and tell everyone that you're listening to the Fresh Toones Show with Dave Paltz. And the theme of today's show is telling our stories. And today I'm letting my mom, who lived to 100, tell her story about growing up on a farm during the Depression near the Finger Lakes. And the story so far has taken her up to where she met my dad, Fred Paltz, and started to build a family of me and my 3 sisters. So we'll get right back to the story, and the title of this chapter is called Life with Freddie.
When I first met my husband, Fred, at the youth group, I said to myself he would be the last person that I would ever date. And sure enough, he was. I became friends with him and found out that he was a pretty nice guy. This guy, Freddie Pulse, had a car, and so whenever we would have anything from the youth group, of course, he would ask me to ride with him, and so I did. We would have picnics and ball games, and sometimes when they had some special music things going on in the parks, just a lot of outside things that we did together. Fred loved playing baseball, although he wasn't too good at it. What they always called him the flyout king, because he would do all these big pop-ups and everybody catch him every time, so he always made it out. But he loved to play baseball. They used to play with a church group. All the churches in the area had a baseball team, and they would go through Genesee Valley Park where they had all their games. At our youth group, we were not supposed to be dancing there. That was a no-no in those days. You didn't do any of those things, dancing cheek to cheek and all that type of thing. So, of course, we would get dancing anyway because everybody wanted to dance, and then they would have one of the groups would stand outside and wait to make sure that Dr. Benke was not coming in to the youth group and catch us dancing. So he never did, I guess, but I'm assuming that we all assumed that he knew what we were doing. In the early 1940s, some friends of ours decided to take a bike ride. Well, first of all, I had to go and rent a bike because I didn't have a bike. So we had to go down to Joseph Avenue where they rented bicycles. And we all rode to Scottsville, New York, which is about 15 miles from Rochester. I had never ridden a bike since I was a teenager, probably, so that was quite an experience for me. But I made it. When we were married, Fred worked at the Todd Company on University Avenue, where they made checks. He was a cutter there. And at the same time, their blackouts and things were taking place here in Rochester. And so he worked for the civil defense. He had an outfit that he had to wear with a gas mask and everything, and patrol the streets if there were any blackouts, and make sure that everybody was safe in the neighborhood. During the war, we were rationed on sugar, coffee, gasoline. In fact, we had little stamps that we had to give every time we bought some of those items to make sure that they were equally distributed. One of the things that was rationed during the war was butter. And so we would buy a oleo, which was plain white, and there was a little pack of yellow coloring along in there, and you softened up that white pound of whatever it was, oleo, and then mixed yourself the yellow coloring in to get to look like butter. We were happy to hear when the war had ended because our best friend, Ellsworth Lease, and many other friends from church had served in war, and they had returned home, which we were very happy to hear. We really didn't know too much what was going on during the war until after the war was over, when we had heard what had been happening to the Jewish people. This was very hard to hear, and I hope this will never happen again. In 1944, our first child was born, a little girl, Carol Elizabeth. Fred was very excited, and I can still see the picture of him yet, standing in the door with a big grin on his face. 2 years later, we had our second child, another girl, Janet Ruth. And then there was a little lull in our life because we lived upstairs over Grandma Pulse's house in our 3 rooms. So we really didn't have much room for any more family. In the 40s and 50s, I can remember a ragman coming around. I don't know just how often he came, maybe once a week or something like that, with a horse and wagon and collected all the, not really junk, but it was rags, newspapers, and that type of thing. That was his livelihood. These kids used to love to just go out and watch the horse go by with the wagon and ragman picking up things from people's houses. I remember going to pay the taxes on the subway. I would get on at Monroe Avenue, get off at the downtown station, don't remember what that was called now, and I would have to go up all those stairs. It was dark, and I'd go to the city hall and pay the taxes, do some shopping, go back to the subway, and then get back off again at Monroe Avenue and walk home. In 1952, we had another child, David Frederick. At this time, we thought we could rearrange the house enough to put the 2 girls into 1 bedroom. We bought a rollaway bed for our living room where Fred and I slept, and then we had a hallway which was big enough to put a bed in, and so that's where we put our little boy. After our son was born, Fred got a second job being a sexton of St. Mark's Lutheran Church. No matter what the kids did wrong, Fred always said, "I saw it coming," and I wish he had told me a little bit sooner, because I maybe could have saved some of those bumps and scratches. We got our first TV in the early 50s, and the reason we got one was because our children knew that our neighbors had one, and they wanted to be to their house all the time watching TV. So we decided that we had better get our own television. At least our children would be home where we knew what they were doing and up to.
55 seconds. Are you ready?
We always liked watching the game shows. We especially enjoyed Beat the Clock because we had the game and we enjoyed playing that with our children. One in particular was the $64,000 question. I remember from having to rush home from our Lenten services, which are on Wednesday night, to see that show. It was on at 9 o'clock, and I'm sure the Lord was not pleased with that. Up until the time we sold our house on Nelson Street in the 1970s, we heated our house with coal. It would take a half a day to get the house warmed up. By the time it warmed up, it was time to almost shut it off in the evening to go to bed. We had to shovel the ashes out, shovel the coal in, turn up the thermostat, and wait for it to warm up. I can remember the kids sitting in front of the registers, huddled up, because that's where the warm heat was coming from. In 1961, we had our last child. We had another girl, Barbara Catherine. When my first child became a teenager, things had changed so in the world culturally that it was very difficult for parents to bring up children and not making themselves feel that they were way too old-fashioned. We were dancing long before, in our young years, and me and teenagers, were growing up, we were dancing. I don't know if we had the same kind of dances, but we were dancing. We never drank. We never smoked. Well, I guess he did as a teenager or something, but I don't know what his father told him. He did something, he never smoked again. When Carol was just a young teenager, some older friends were visiting us. She came in puffing on this candy cigarette and making us all think that she had a real cigarette. I just wanted to strangle her. Because I just couldn't imagine that these older folks were thinking, why am I letting that teenager smoke? At the time that our son David started high school, there were riots in our city. I knew there was a lot of racial tension, but I did not realize what the cause of it was. At the same time, a black woman with 2 children and a male friend who was white moved in next door to us. And we became friends and talked over the back fence in summertime. her children, especially her young boy, was friends with our young daughter, Barb. I don't remember anyone ever saying anything to me about her being black or not welcomed in the neighborhood or thing. I mean, we all accepted them. In the last 2 years of David's high school, busing was enforced in the schools of Rochester. Sometimes Dave would come home from school early because of the racial tension in the cafeterias and fights that were going on, which was a concern for parents because we really didn't know what was going on in the schools. But by the time Barb got into elementary school, the busing was just a normal thing then. And I can remember all the yellow buses lined up in front of her school when she would be getting out of school, waiting for the children who had been bused into the school.
Well, before I share the last chapter of my mom's story, I'd like to share with folks how important this time of interacting with my mom and her telling the story. If you get a chance and you can sit down with somebody that's your parents or your grandparents or whoever and get some information from them, you're going to grow a lot just in the interactions that are in the process. It doesn't have to be the highest production values to have value to you and maybe other people that you share it with. So if you get a chance, sit down and listen to some other people's stories. And now I'm going to wrap up these interviews that I did with my mom, and hope you're enjoying it. This is called The Last Chapter.
In 1969, we moved out to 2090 South Clinton Avenue, which was the church house on the church property. Fred was still the caretaker, and so that made it much, much easier for him to care for the church. When Fred fully retired, we bought a little house on Meadowbrook Road. I was very happy because I had always dreamed of having our own little house someplace. And this was it. When we were about ready to buy cemetery plots, we bought a house. In our retirement years, we were able to do a little traveling. So we were able to go to Arizona, North Carolina, to visit all of our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Early in the 1990s, a group from St. Mark's decided to work at the soup kitchen 1 day a week. We went down to St. Peter and Paul's Church on East Main Street, which was a nice big church and had a nice big basement. And it was always nice and cool down there to serve all the guests that came, and there were many. When Fred became ill, I was able to care for him for a couple of years at home. But then when the work became just too much for me, I was encouraged to put him into a comfort home where he would receive good care. And I was able to do that because I was able to put him in one that I could walk to from my home. So I was able to go to see him every day, have lunch with him at times, and spend most of the day with him until at nighttime after dinner I would return back home again. There were a few nights that they even put an extra cot into the room and I was able to stay all night with Fred. And I was so happy that I was there the morning that he took his last breath. I was very happy with the care that he got at St. John's home. They were very attentive to him and helped him in any way that they could. I still keep in contact with St. John because I have joined St. John's Auxiliary, which we help in any way we can with the people who are living there at this time. And I really enjoy that. Almost 92, I still enjoy my little house, which was really our first house that we owned together. And it's just so good to have the peace and quiet and to do the things I enjoy doing and to be able to sit down when I'm tired without feeling guilty. And I just really enjoy living. To tell my grandchildren and great-grandchildren, it would be to be happy with who they are. It is not materialistic things that will bring you happiness. Always try to do the best you can. And as Grandpa would always say, it helps you on the road when you got a heavy load. Singing is the thing that makes you happy.
There was a girl of the Finger Lakes, and she grew up on a farm. There were hard times in America, but still she found some way with the love of her family and a faith in God above. She did her chores joyfully, although the chickens were not her friends. Well, they sold their crops and they ate what they could not, prepared their food with joy and they savored every crumb. There was a girl of the Finger Lakes, and she grew up on a farm. There were hard times in America, but still she found some way. She walked to school every day. In that one room she learned her ABCs. Only a baked potato for her lunch, but it warmed her to the core. And Sunday she'd sing her praise to Jesus for everything they had. It might not seem like much when love is all you've got, but gold will never feed your soul. It might not seem like much when love is all you've got, but gold will never feed your soul. And that was my mother, Catherine Paltz, sharing her life story with us. I'm really glad that I took a little break, a couple years, to work on this project. And I was so happy to be able to share it with her when she was still alive. Often they played it at her nursing home, so that was kind of nice for them to be able to see another side of my mom. One of the joyous moments of her life was getting married to my dad. And on their 60th anniversary, I wrote this song for them called I Love You, the 60th anniversary song. I took your hand and I said these words. I said I love you. I love you. I love you. Yes, I do. We've been together for oh so many years, so wrinkled, gray, and battered. There's only one thing I have to say: I love you. I love you. I love you. Yes, I do. I love you. I love you. Yes, I do. I love you. Yes, I do. I love you. Yes, I do. Well, to continue today's Fresh Toones show with the theme of telling our stories and hearing the story of my mom's life and playing some songs that I wrote for her and my dad on their anniversary, I also have this song called Remember It All, and how it's not a bad idea to sometimes take a moment, sit down and remember it all, good, bad, and in between. This song is called Remember It All.
When the leaves begin to turn and the petals start to fall, stop and remember it all. Remember the joy of spring, recall summer and the love she brings. It's fall now, stop and remember it all. Remember, but don't forget, your love is what you live. Love and remember it all. Old, young, or in between, remember where you've been. Oh, remember it all. Remember when you were lost, recall what brought you back. Oh, remember it all. Remember and don't forget, your love is what you live. Live and remember it all. Remember what made you sing, the tunes that let you smile within. Oh, remember it all. And if your memories start to dim, smile and it'll all kick in. And you'll remember it all. Oh, remember it all. You'll remember it all. You'll remember it all. You'll remember it all.
Well, I've got a couple more songs I'd like to play for you today, and I think I'll keep the happier, bouncier one for the end. This song is kind of a sad song for me because it was one of the last times I was able to speak with my mom. She was semi-conscious, I guess. She was in the last stages of COVID and struggling to breathe. But I was able to talk to her on the cell phone, and the nurse heard me mention that how much we enjoyed singing together. And the nurse said, Dave, why don't you sing one of those songs that you would sing with her? Right, my mind went blank, and the only thing that came to mind was this song called This Little Light of Mine. So I started singing it to her, and it was the last communications I had with her before I made my last wishes, as my sisters were luckily able to get into the room with her. My mom was in North Carolina, and that was why on this short notice I couldn't get down to see her, because it was in a matter of days when they discovered she had COVID, and then she passed away. This song is called This Little Light of Mine.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Every day and every way, I'm gonna sing it every day. I'm gonna let this little light shine. All around the neighborhood, I'm gonna let it shine. All around the neighborhood, I'm gonna let it shine. All around the neighborhood, I'm gonna let it shine. Every day and every way, I'm gonna sing it every day. I'm gonna let this little light shine. Hide it under a bushel, no. I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under a bushel, no, I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under a bushel, no, I'm gonna let it shine. Every day, in every way, gonna sing it every day. I'm gonna let this little light shine. Well, don't you try to foof it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, don't you try to foof it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, don't you try to foof it out. I'm gonna let it shine every day in every way. I'm gonna sing it every day. I'm gonna let this little light shine. All together now. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine every day in every way. I'm gonna sing it every day. I'm gonna let this little light shine. One more time. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine every day in every way. I'm gonna sing it every day. I'm gonna let this little light shine.
Well, as our time runs out here on the Fresh Toones Show, I'm going to end up today's show with this bouncy song that almost feels like a sing-along. If you catch on to the hook, you can sing along. In the end of the documentary and during my mom's interviews, she wrapped up the show with saying, "Remember what Grandpa always would sing. It helps you on the road when you got a heavy load. Singing is the thing that makes you happy." I did plenty of research on that song, and I could not find it recorded anyplace on the internet. I don't know where my dad got those two lines from, but he would sing them over and over, so I kind of grew up on them. And just recently, thinking of my mom and what she had said, and what she had said about my dad singing that song, I decided, well, I might as well write my own song and my own verses to it, and this is what came about. This song is called "Singing is the Thing That Makes You Happy."
It helps you on the road when you got a heavy load. Singing is the thing that makes you happy. When you're down and out, feel all alone. Singing is the thing that makes you happy. Sing it now. Singing is the thing that makes you happy. Sing it now. Singing is the thing that makes you happy. When the ceiling falls and you've lost your love, singing is the thing that makes you happy. When you're so far down you must raise your voice, singing is the thing that makes you happy. Sing it now. Singing is the thing that makes you happy. Sing it now. Singing is the thing that makes you happy. You may not believe it. You may say it's all a lie. You might clench your mouth shut. Please give it a try. Well, it helps you on the road when you got a heavy load. Singing is the thing that makes you happy. When you're down and out, feel all alone. Singing is the thing that makes you happy. Sing it now. Singing is the thing that makes you happy. Sing it now. Singing is the thing that makes you happy. Sing it now. Singing is the thing that makes you happy. Sing it now. Singing is the thing that makes you happy. Sing it now. the thing that makes you happy.
That's it for the Fresh Tune Show today. I hope you enjoyed it. It was great to be able to share my mom's story with you. I hope you go out there and discover some stories in the folks that you know from your family members or friends, and maybe even be able to share them with other folks so we can all grow. This is Dave Paltz. Have a great week, and thanks for tuning in.
Paint me a picture, write me a song, tell me your story, for you're gone.